It's a new day with the S62 wagon swap. Touring, I should say, sorry. I think first hands first, I should change my shirt because we're about to get greasy and oily, dude. That's more like it. There we go. Let's get back to it. While I'm waiting for a bunch of parts to show up, I figured I'm gonna do rod bearings on this S62. If you're unaware, the M5 that I pulled this V8 out of, I've had that car for quite a while now. Didn't drive it a whole lot, it was just kind of like a back burner project, but I have done timing chains on it. So in terms of timing and guides and all that, that is all taken care of. Head gaskets don't need to replace yet, it's not really doing anything. I do want to replace the piston rings, but I think I'll save that for another time. In the meantime, however, I figured for sure this engine is at 200,000+ miles. I will definitely replace rod bearings. Which brings me to a point. We got rod bearings. If you haven't got the gist of this, yes, this episode is brought to you by King Racing Bearings. Guy from King Racing, I appreciate you. I was gonna buy these anyway, like I told him. I was literally planning to buy them the day after we had our conversation. And he reached out and he wanted to sponsor this build, and I am, the least I could be is grateful for it. And the least I could do is place a quick little ad for you guys. And not even for the reasons that you may think, but because I truly believe these bearings in this product, they're innovators, man. They've been around since before time. This is before you and I. They make products for everything, including your 2002 Camry to a McLaren F1, whatever, dude, you name it, they probably have. I mean, these guys know best, dude. Anything from the materials they use, from the coatings they use, from the amount of layers they use, they know what they're doing, dude. This is why they don't fail. This is why they are so successful. This is why they make products for cars that are absolutely mental amount of horsepower, dude, and they survive. They know what they're doing. So if you're thinking of doing a rod bearing job or a main bearing job for your engine and you're unsure of which product to get, King Racing, baby. Get King Racing and King Racing only. I went with standard size, not oversized by any means, because I'm pretty sure this engine has solid tolerances still. Every time I've done an oil change, there's no sort of sparkly metallic materials in the oil, so I'm just taking my bets, and I'm gonna go with standard. Of course, I'm gonna measure everything out prior to applying them and actually installing them, but you know what it is. To remove the oil pump, first we have to remove these little pickup tubes. There's going to be some O-rings, I'm assuming, some gaskets or some sort. Definitely didn't order those quite yet, but okay, we'll get those. Gonna remove this baffle right here. There's a couple 10 mils, it looks like. Then we'll have access to the actual sprocket, the chain sprocket, right in there underneath this cover. And then we got to remove these 6mm Allens. 2 10s right there, 2 10s right here for the solenoids. Pull those out, and then we're gonna remove the entire oil pump assembly, and that will give us access to the actual oil pan itself. There's a bunch of bolts on the inside, and then a bunch of bolts on the outside, and then we're gonna remove the whole thing. Why is this one loose, dude? Whoa. Yeah, so somebody's clearly been in here. Someone's definitely been in here before me. There's a whole bolt that's just loose in here. We might be in for a surprise, boys. Passenger side. Driver's side. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. A little cocktail for the boys. Based off of what I can see as of right now, everything's looking pretty good. The cylinder walls, there's no scoring on any of them so far. That's a good sign. That's a really good sign. The rods, none of them are moving at all. I already checked all of them. Not a single one with extra movement, unnecessary movement. So we're off to a good start. I'm gonna start rotating the engine. I'm gonna start removing caps and replacing rod bearings, baby. Oh. Dude, they're looking great. They are looking good, man. No scoring on the crankshaft. Okay, we're off to a good start. Push this piston up. First set of bearings are looking very promising. This is the top one, that is the bottom one. There is almost no wear. This is phenomenal. If all of them are like that, oh, I am happy, dude. Either they were placed before my knowledge, or they never were, and these are just original bearings, which I wouldn't be surprised, because dude, these S62s are phenomenal, baby. So before I put the new rod bearings in and tighten them for good, before I torque down the new rod bearings in, I'm gonna use the old bolts, put the new bearings in, use the old bolts, and use plastic gauge. Yes, plastic gauge, because by the way, BMW new TIS literally says to use plastic gauge. I understand that in a situation where a crankshaft is damaged or there's excessive wear, then yes, you need to use more accurate tools to measure this, but in this case, it's gonna be fine. And I'm gonna use some good old plastic gauge, and it's gonna tell me exactly what I need to know, and we'll be good. For me to do this job accurately, I will need to, according to BMW TIS S62, this engine, use old bolts, 5 Newton meters, 20 Newton meters, and then 65 degrees. And then you unscrew them and you check your clearances by the plastic gauge. And then we'll put in the new ARP bolts and tighten for good, baby. Fingers crossed everything's good. So my tolerance is anywhere from 0.009 millimeters to 0.025 millimeters. 0.025 millimeters is the absolute most, and that is what this line indicates. Can't really see, but that's 0.025 millimeters. As long as the gauge doesn't go past this parameter, we're in the clear. So let's go ahead and do it. Just gotta make sure everything's cleaned off. Some brake clean, wipe it all completely dry. And there's physically no difference in the King Racing bearings, whether one is top, which one is bottom. They're all the same, so I'm just gonna put the top one first. Make sure it's dry on the backside and make sure it's dry on the actual rod itself. You slide it into where this notch is on the actual bearing and you match it up with one of the notches in the rod itself. And you put that corner in first, slide it in, make sure it's flat to the actual crankshaft, sorry, to the rod. And make sure you don't pull your piston out too much because, well, that is not a good thing. Now I'm gonna do the same thing to the rod cap. I'm gonna clean it off with brake clean. And the same sort of idea goes here. This little notch on the rod goes into one of these notches in here. And make sure, by the way, BMWs like to use broken crankshafts, or rods. In terms of, you take the rod, it's all cast, and they snap them on both ends, and that way the rod cap can only go into the rod one way. Now I'm gonna slide the piston up a little bit to clear the crankshaft. I'm gonna seat it back to where it belongs. Again, be very careful and gentle. Don't scratch your crankshaft. There we go. That is seated perfectly. Before I put the plastic gauge, I'm gonna confirm which side of the rod goes where. Nope, that is the wrong side. Boom. This is the connection it makes. Perfect. I'm gonna put the plastic gauge in the center, just like so. There we are. That is in, it's seated. Take your old rod bearing bolts, or rod cap bolts I should say. Just do them finger tight for now. First up, we got 5 Newton meters. Tighten this. There it goes. Clicks. 5. That is 5. Double check. Perfect. That is 5. Then 20 Newton meters. Mine is already set. 20 Newton meters. There we go. Perfect. 20, 20. Now we're doing 65 degrees. Nice, that is a lot harder than expected. Almost. Okay, 65 degrees. Next one. Yep. Perfect. And what this does is it simulates a proper stretch and proper clearance. So we're going to remove these bolts again, remove the cap, and we're going to measure it with the gauge and see if it's in clear. Bolts are out. As you can see, this little piece of plastic or whatever that we put on there is now stretched and torqued. And now the top measurement, this big green boy, is what tells us if we're in spec or not. We are definitely within spec, so this one is good. We can now lube up both the inner and the outer rod bearings. From the inside, we could lube up the crankshaft and torque it down to 50 foot-pounds and call it a day. Why 50 foot-pounds? Because we're using ARP bolts and they require 50 foot-pounds of torque. Take some lubrication oil, engine assembly lube, and lube up the inner portion of the rod bearing that's going to be touching the actual crankshaft. That is it. No more is needed. Lube up the actual crankshaft a bit so it wouldn't be bone dry. Pull the rod and the piston back in. Seat it in its place, solid. Take the rod cap, do the same thing, just like so. Make sure the rod fits perfectly, yep. And before you take your new ARP bolts, it's a good thing to check that they're the same pitch and they're the same length as the old bolts, just to be safe. I've already done that, we're in the clear. Use the ARP assembly lube, put a little bit on the threads, just like so, and put a little bit on the actual bottom end of the cap. That way when it torques, it's seated perfectly, just like so. And you can start applying them in. Yeah, baby. You would think that by now your boy would have a stretch gauge, but I don't. And 50 foot-pounds is enough with my experience of doing this. Never once had an issue. And since this is kind of just a high torque spec from the get-go, what I like to do is start off with 25 per corner and then put it up to 50. Boom, boom, boom. Solid. That way it stretches evenly instead of cranking one side and then cranking the other. ARP bolts are a 12.11 millimeters, so that's a whole different socket now. Okay, 25 foot-pounds. There we go, that's 25. That is 25. Now I'm going to adjust it to 50. Same thing, start with 1. Double check. Boom, 50. Second one. And then I'll just like to double check all of them. Boom. 50 foot-pounds. Rod number 1 done. Still no play. We are good. Solid. Now I'm going to do the exact same procedure for the rest of the 7 pistons and rods, and hopefully we come to a good conclusion. And just like that, all rod bearings are replaced. Everything is looking perfect. Everything was in absolute perfect tolerances. If you take a look at the old rod bearings, I mean, nothing, no copper. Those are the worst. The last 4 cylinders were the worst, but still in all very good shape. I am not worried about this engine whatsoever, baby. Time to button it up and call it a day. Of course, before we apply the gasket on, make sure to put some RTV, some high temp probably, just a little bit on everywhere where there's a little crack or a crease, kind of like where the front timing cover is, where it meets the block. You want to put a little bit of RTV, and then goes the actual metal gasket. And just like that, with the snap of a finger, of course, the engine is back together and everything's good. It turns, everything's well, all the seals are replaced, everything's looking fresh and ready to be swapped into this baby right there. And essentially that's how you do rod bearings on an S62 V8. Dude, I'm just gonna say this, it's cliche, I know, but you should like and subscribe because we just fired up this V10 M3 for the very first time in almost 5 years. It's the previous video on the channel. Hit it up, dude, there's just so much going on. There's truly so much going on, just can't stay busy enough, and it's good, man, it's good. So with that being said, I think this is a good leeway to end the video. Stay tuned because for the next one, we're gonna be doing a whole lot to the wagon, really. There's gonna be a lot going on. We're gonna be cutting the trunk, we're gonna be making room for exhaust, I'm gonna put the subframe on, put the rear wheel bearings on, or replaced already, and dude, yeah, we're just gonna start getting into it. Engine mounts are on their way. We're gonna put the engine in, start doing wiring, all that, put the clutch on, pilot bearing, rear main, all that is gonna go in. So, appreciate you, peace.